Hey, welcome back, podcast friends. Now, in today's episode, I want to talk about plants. So, we're going to be talking about fruits and vegetables. And just right off the bat, I just want you to realize I am not against eating fruits and vegetables. I'm all for it. My thing is God made food versus man made food. So, definitely stay away from all the man made food with all the chemicals and toxins and stick with God made food, real meat, real fat, real fruits, real vegetables. That's where I want to go. The only thing is, you've got to be very, very careful when you eat plants because every single plant on the earth has toxins in it. And so now that doesn't mean they're going to kill you because some toxins will. Some plants will kill you when they eat it, when you eat it. Some of them will make you sick. Some of them will hurt you. And some of them, they have toxins in them that will just slowly accumulate over the years as you build these up. It's called bioaccumulation. And then that's when it starts causing trouble later on in life. And these are the hardest ones to deal with because you eat them all the time, you don't have any issues, and then all of a sudden later on in life you do. And now all of a sudden you realize what it was. Exact same thing with diabetes. You eat carbohydrates, plant-based foods all the time, every single day, all throughout the day, and you slowly accumulate insulin over decades, 1, 2, 3 decades, and then all of a sudden you end up with insulin resistance, which is what type 2 diabetes is. So it's kind of the same thing. But some of these toxins in plants are actually used as medicine, and some are actually very good for you. So that's kind of what this is going to be about. And some of the top toxins that we're going to be talking about, or not talking about, but just some of the toxins that are in plants are like phytates. Phytates are things that reduce the absorption of minerals. When you eat it, they actually keep vitamins and minerals from being absorbed into your body where you can use them. Then there's things like tannins. And tannins, what these do is these inhibit your digestive enzymes. So when you eat these, it makes it very hard for you able to get a lot of the vitamins and the minerals out of your food and to be able to utilize them for your body. Then there's also cyanogenic glycosides. What these are is these actually, they release cyanide into your system. And when they're ingested, they're broken down. And there's like 2,500 different plants that have these cyanogenic glycosides in them. So again, you don't want to be eating all the cyanide. Then there's also things called saponins. And saponins, these are chemicals that produce like a foamy lather. So a lot of these saponins that we eat are actually being extracted and used in like a lot of detergents. Then there's lectins. And lectins, what these do is they bind to the carbohydrates in the cell wall and it interacts with the cell wall. And what it does, it stimulates your immune system. So your body thinks there's something that shouldn't be in there, and it sets up an immune response. So those are what lectins do. Then there's enzyme inhibitors. Our whole body is just a massive chemical machine. Every single cell is doing all these chemical reactions all the time. And there are some toxins in plants that actually inhibit those enzymes. And so it makes the chemical reactions occur that you can't normally have in your cells. And then there's things called oxalate crystals. And this one's kind of near and dear to my heart. Oxalate crystals, these are tiny little crystals. And when you look under a microscope, they look like tiny little shards of glass. And these are the ones that they don't hurt you at first, but eventually start building up and building up. And these little oxalate crystals, when they get in your body, they can cause inflammation. They think this may have a lot to do with patients who have fibromyalgia, pseudo gout, because gout is caused by uric acid precipitating out into your joints. Well, these oxalate crystals also can precipitate out into your joints and cause the pain, just like you would think with these little tiny shards of glass in your joints. And that's why it's called pseudo gout, because it's not uric acid, but it's still inflammation in your joints. And then there's kidney stones. Most kidney stones are made out of calcium oxalate crystals. So the calcium is what we have in our bodies anyway. And then the oxalate is what we get from eating all these plants. So you put those together, when your body's trying to get rid of them through the bladder, then they can precipitate out, and these cause the kidney stones. And the reason why this is so important to me is because we actually had the same issue with our son. Our son, at that time, before I found out about all these toxins and everything, what he would do is he was getting up and making himself a little protein shake every morning. And in this protein shake, he was putting kale and spinach every single morning, along with some other stuff, but every single morning. Then all of a sudden, he started finding out that he was having blood in his urine. We didn't know why he was having blood in his urine. So he went in and he had it scoped out. They actually had to run a scope up inside, even look inside his bladder, and they found a little lesion that was in his bladder, right where the ureter drips from the kidney into the bladder. Right where that dripped in, there was a little string of a tear. And so he had to actually have a procedure to go in and fix this, a laparoscopic procedure to fix this. This is around the exact same time that I started finding out about these oxalate crystals, because I've heard of other people who've had serious issues with these oxalate crystals. And so we told Brandon, because these oxalate crystals are in things like spinach, kale, almonds. There's a lot of different things like this. And when he was eating spinach and kale every morning, he was building up these oxalate crystals. This is what I think. And these oxalate crystals were going through his ureter into his bladder and causing this lesion. The reason why I think that is because I told him to stop that. As soon as I found out about these oxalates, I told him, stop doing the spinach and kale every morning. And he stopped, and he hasn't had the blood anymore, because after the procedure, he still was having a little bit of blood. And this is when I thought maybe this is what the deal is. So he stopped it. He's had no more bleeding ever since then. So that's not proof, but it definitely makes me think that that's exactly what it was. So, and remember, these phytotoxins, they're not actually trying to kill you. They're just trying to protect themselves. So this is nature's natural pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. These are the things that plants have to make sure that that they don't get eaten by these other things. And this is why one way that you can cut down on all this bioaccumulation is by eating things seasonally. If they are not growing in the ground at that time, you should not be eating them. And when you talk about fruits and vegetables in stores, you can eat asparagus at Thanksgiving, or you can have strawberries in the middle of February. I mean, it's crazy. You can eat these, and we should not be doing this, because a little bit is okay, but when you do it all the time, you start building up all these toxins. So, and I'm not saying don't eat plants. Okay, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you need to rethink how you eat them. And so, plants were not put on this earth to feed us. That's not what they're here for. And as you saw or heard in my last podcast, our system, our digestive tract, is not physically made to digest plants. There's things that we have to do, and things that we've learned over the centuries, that makes it where we can actually digest the plants on the outside of our bodies and do a lot of things on the outside of our bodies that a lot of animals are actually equipped to do on the inside. And you'll understand more what I'm saying. If you haven't heard the podcast just prior to this one, you might go back and listen to that, and you'll understand what I'm saying about how our digestive tracts have changed over the years. So your question isn't whether you should eat them. It's how do I eat them that can make them safe, nutritious, and available to our bodies without hurting us. And one of the best ways you can do this to make sure you're buying something seasonally is don't buy it from a grocery store. Buy it from a farmer's market. If it's not growing, they're not going to be selling it. So that's a very quick, easy way to make sure that you're eating. And check with your farmer at the farmer's market and see, because a lot of these, they don't put a lot of these chemicals on their plants. They do it called regenerative, and they can do regenerative farming, and they can make it a lot healthier. But you have to be careful, because, and even though some of them may spray their weeds and everything with these toxins like glyphosate, when you do like you do for the big food companies, that's called monocropping. They build these huge fields with corn and soy and wheat. Those are the three main ones that our government gives money to right now, because that's what the food manufacturers want. And food manufacturers have a lot of money. And when they grow these crops like that, they go down and instead of just spot spraying these herbicides, what they do is they just crop dust. They just fly a plane over, and they just put the chemicals everywhere. So that's what you have to be careful of. But there's things that we can do that can detoxify these plants. And there's lots of things. One of them is called nixtamalization. And nixtamalization is what you do with corn or with maize. And that's just where you soak it and you cook it in a basic solution. And this helps get a lot of the nutrients out and gets a lot of the toxins, deactivates a lot of the toxins. There's also geophagy, which is just like it says, phagy means eat, geo is earth. So it's when you actually eat the earth to help detoxify some of these plants. And I'll give you an example of that in just a little bit. But then other things like dehydrating, grinding, grating, cooking, and fermentation. All these things are things that we do to plants to actually decrease the amount of toxins and increase the amount of fruit vitamins and minerals that we can absorb into our body. So remember, so plants have evolved over the entire age of the earth. They've been evolving and just to be able to survive, to thrive, and to be able to procreate. They want to be able to make more and more plants. They are surviving just like we are. And in this, that's how they've learned how to produce these things. They're called allelochemicals. And what these are created and released by the plant. Some of them are to repel things. So they make these chemicals like the oxalate crystals, and they make these toxins or these chemicals that will repel things like insects, funguses, diseases, and other animals, including humans. They make these plants so we will not eat them. Um, and another good example is the potato skin. You know, I know there are some people out there that say that potato skin is the most nutritious part of the plant, but what actually is happening is the skin is the most toxic part of the plant, and so that's why it's very important. You don't just pick up and eat a raw potato out of the ground and start eating it because you're going to get these toxins. So and these toxins are on there again to ward off things like funguses and pests and insects. So that's why they're there. And that's why we have to do something to it. But some of these little chemicals, they're actually in there to attract things like the smell and taste of flowers to attract bees so they can spread their pollen. So they can procreate. They can have more seeds growing up everywhere or plants. And then there's some like fruits that actually attract the animals. And these are ones that, and think a good way to think about this is think of a banana. When you eat a green banana, when you eat it, it tastes very bitter. It doesn't taste very good at all. And that's on purpose because the plant does not want you eating these because the seeds are not ripe yet. As that banana ripens, now the seeds are ready. They're ready to germinate. So what happens is now the banana tastes great. So this is when the animals come up. They eat these bananas now that they're ready to procreate. You eat it, walk around. These animals will walk around and then they poop, and the seeds will be in the poop, and that's how they regenerate. But they don't do it until the time, and that's how you know. That's the difference between a green banana and a ripe banana. And there's all kinds of other examples of this, but that's what they're doing. When you go to a grocery store and get these plants, these are totally domesticated. They've been genetically modified, and it's basically it's an artificial selection. Instead of having natural selection that these plants have to learn how to survive, this is artificial selection. We do things to these plants, and we radiate these plants and everything, and we totally wipe out their normal protection. And the reason they do this is because they want to make all these plants larger, sweeter, easier to harvest, more productive. They want to be able to ship them and make them available all year round. And what they do is they remove the toxins, they strip them of all their natural defensives. So now you have this little domesticated plant. And then since they can't have these toxins and everything anymore to help protect themselves. Now, since we've ruined that, we have to detoxify them. So this is when we come in and we bombard them with all kinds of herbicides, fungicides, pesticides. I mean, we just put all these chemicals, and all these chemicals, we're adding all these to our air, we're adding them to our water, and we're adding them to ourselves. Every time we eat these domesticated plants that we get at the grocery store, we are eating toxins. And we've already talked about some toxins are good, some toxins are bad, but there's also the bioaccumulation that you have to worry about. So that's what, when you domesticate a plant, you reduce its natural nutritional density, so they don't have as many nutrients anymore. A lot of times you decrease their medicinal value, and a lot of times you also change their flavor. Their flavor isn't as good. What they try to do is they make these things as sweet as possible because that's the flavor that they know everyone is addicted to, because the food companies have got everybody addicted to it. And now if you eat something, if it doesn't taste sweet, you think it doesn't taste any good. And I really want you to change your thoughts on how you do that. But these have become less nutritious, but you can grow a lot more of them. So they do things like they try to you get larger tomatoes. You get these shorter little wheat stalks, the shorter statured wheat. So they grow really fast, but they have these great big grain heads. This is totally unnatural. And then, and with corn, they genetically modify them so you can grow corn in a lot smaller space. So you can get a lot more corn in the same acreage of land. And these are just some of the things that we're doing with domesticating these plants instead of eating them the way they're supposed to be. And when you do this, the plants don't even try to survive anymore. It's like they just give up. So they used to grow these really, really deep roots, and that's where they got a lot of the nutrients. But now they don't even grow nutrients. They just like the wheat. They're just little bitty wheat, but these great big grain heads on them. But it also it decreases the amount of phytochemicals in it that are good. So there's a lot of antioxidants that plants have, vitamins. And now what they found out is we're seeing less and less protein and a lot more starch in this new domesticated plants that these people are making. And like a good example is the corn's ancestor. What corn used to be is called teosint. The old corn, historically, the old corn was about 30% protein and only 2% sugar. Okay, 30% protein, 2% sugar. Corn today is about 40% sugar. It's gone from 2% to 40%. And this is all from genetic modification. And this is not good for the plant and it's not good for us either. And that's why a lot of farmers, they try to get these old seeds from these old things that haven't been manipulated by man. And these are called heirloom varieties. An heirloom is a seed that's still from the old thing. And these heirloom varieties, when you have plants from that, this is what gives the plant more nutrients and it makes it taste better. These are the kinds of things that farmers markets check and see, but a lot of farmers markets of farmers, they get these heirloom grains. So it makes it easier for us and healthier for us. So what do we do about this? What is all this? There are ways that we can detoxify these plants outside of the body before we ever eat them. And some of these are like cooking, slicing, dehydrating. Sometimes you submerge them in water, and this can leach out of a lot of water soluble, like the tannins. We were talking about the tannins. It can leach a lot of this out. And just like we were talking about with corn, with nixtamalization. And then some tribes, native tribes, have actually learned that you can actually bake underground to decrease some of these toxins. And I'll talk about that. So some examples are like arum. Arum, this is a plant that the Native Americans learned to harvest. And what these arum has is it has what's called raphides. And raphides are bundles of calcium oxalate crystals. Remember, we talked about the calcium oxalate crystals? These are the ones that look like tiny shards of glass underneath the microscope. These are the ones that I think was causing my son's bladder to bleed. But these are called raphides. So it's bundles of these these oxalate crystals. When you eat this, what happens is these calcium oxalate crystals, they can puncture the skin and put a poison in there in your body. Then this is what causes your mouth, lips, and throat can burn and swell, and you can actually swell up so much that it actually blocks off your windpipe, and you can die. So these are things they had to do. What they found out that they could decrease these Native Americans by digging these pits. They dig a pit in the ground. They'd put these potatoes that had all these raphides in them, the arum, they put those in the ground, they cover back up, and then they build a fire on top of them. And this is how they were able to actually detoxify these. Now, what it did was this disabled those raphides. So it didn't take care of the toxin, but it did take care of the raphides. So you weren't puncturing the skin so this poison could get into the skin. So that's kind of things that have happened throughout history where people have learned on the outside how you can make these plants less toxic. Another one is called geophagy. And that's just what it said. Phage means to eat, and geo means earth. And there are some tribes that have learned that, as an example, the Amerindians Indians in the Altiplano area of the Andes, these Indians found out that they could safely eat highly toxic native potatoes. And what they would do with these native potatoes is they would eat the potatoes, but they'd also eat clay along with it. And they found that this clay and the potato would bind together in the stomach, and the clay would bind those toxins so you could poop it all out. And that would allow the rest of the potato to be able to be eaten. And so that are other things. And we still do things like that today if somebody comes in with a poisoning, and there's different things like charcoal that we give them that binds with that toxin in the GI tract so it doesn't get absorbed into your body. So we still kind of do the same thing. Another thing that you can do to plants to make them more healthy and more nutritious is fermentation. And this is a huge one. You can do fermentation on a lot of different plants. And what this does is when you add fermentation, you reduce and you deactivate a lot of these chemical compounds that can actually cause danger to you. And the way you do fermentation is basically just letting the natural process occur. So this is when you use the bacteria and yeast and other microorganisms that already exist in the air, and they come in and they start fermenting your food, and it ferments the food. Um, and makes these chemicals, some of these chemicals, it makes them where they aren't as toxic to us. And again, we're just doing it. So basically, what we're doing by using all these yeast and microorganisms that are already in the air, this fermentation is a controlled rot. And all we have to do is control the temperature, oxygen, salt, hydration, time, and other factors. And we can actually make a controlled rot. So we can get the best out of the plants and get release a lot of these toxins. And a good example of this is sourdough bread. Sourdough bread, if you get sourdough bread from a grocery store, most of that is not sourdough bread. Look at it and make sure there's not vegetable seed oils and sugar and all that. But even if those are gone, if you look on the active ingredient list of these breads and you see the word yeast, that is not a real sourdough bread. What they've done with the yeast is they bypass this huge, major, important step of using the bacteria and the yeast and funguses that are floating around the air all around us all the time. You're bypassing that very important process on how it gets rid of these chemicals like starches, gets rid of the sugars and everything that makes breads better. And that's why if you eat over in Europe, you're going to see a lot different sourdough bread than you do over here. So if you see yeast, that's not sourdough bread. Put it back on the shelf because you don't want to bypass this very, very important process. And some other examples of fermentation would be like sauerkraut or beer or yogurt or pickles. These are all examples. Then there's some newer ones, newer fermented things, like if you've ever heard of kombucha or miso or kimchi. These are also go through the fermentation product or process. As far as dairy, you can have yogurt, kefir, cheese, and grains. They can do these grains just like we said with the sourdough bread. So fermentation is what helps you with the sourdough bread, as long as you're not bypassing that step by using yeast. And then even some meats are actually go through a fermentation process, like salami. So, and again, this is when you have your natural bacteria, they're feeding off the sugars in these plants. So that alone is making this a lot healthier for us because it's the sugar that's killing us. That's why I say you don't have to eat plants, but decrease the amount because they are all based on glucose. All plants have the basic building block of glucose. However, when it goes through the fermentation process, that can eat a lot of this yeast. And it can also it does a whole bunch of different healthy things. Fermentation does for the health of our bodies. So these technologies, again, all these technologies that we use is a way for us to prepare our food on the outside of our body before we ever eat it, since we don't have the GI tract to break this down like a bunch of different animals do. Again, I refer you back to the podcast I just did, and it talks about the different animals and the different types of GI tracts they have to eat these different plants and seeds. So all we're trying to do is pre-digest our food, so our GI tracts don't have to work as hard to get these plants and stuff in there that we were not equipped to do. And this also makes the nutrients a lot more accessible. So I know there was a lot of information here, and feel free to listen to it again, but this is all stuff that I wasn't aware of. And so I thought you'd want to know. So this is, I'm not saying an overall stay away from plants. I'm not saying that by any means. I am saying stay away from man-made food. But as far as fruits and vegetables, just be really careful. And even things that you think, and that's where a lot of the problems come in, is the plants that have these toxins that do not hurt you at first. But when you eat them all the time, every day, all throughout the year, this is when the toxins build up, like the oxalate crystals in my son. Okay. Just like insulin levels in people who eat carbohydrates all the time. These things, they build up over time, and you think there's nothing wrong with it until all of a sudden there is. And that's when the problem is. And that makes it so hard because if you wait till all this stuff builds up, Now you don't know. It's like people tend to think, well, it can't be because of this, because I've been eating that my whole life and didn't have any troubles. And that's where the thought process is incorrect. It's very possible that that is what it is. So if you have any inflammation in your body, okay, if you feel like you're hurting all the time, it may be because of some of these oxalate crystals or any of these other toxins that plants produce. So eat your fruits, eat your vegetables, minimal. Make sure you eat them seasonally. If they're not growing in the ground at that particular time that you're eating it, you shouldn't be eating it either. And again, the easiest way, the best way to know if they are seasonal is to buy them from a farmer's market. Buy them from a farmer. They'll tell you, because if it's not seasonal, they don't have it for you to eat. So it makes it very, very easy. So I know there was a lot of information in this. I wanted you to be aware of, it's not just as easy as growing a plant, take it out of the ground, wash it off and eat it. That would be very, very, very dangerous. So that's all I have for now. I kind of went along with the last podcast, and I hope this helps. I hope it makes you think things. And if nothing else, look up some of the toxins that are in some of the plants that you tend to eat, if you tend to eat a lot of plants. And just be aware, and remember, there's all kinds of ways that you can detoxify these plants before you ever put them in your mouth, and some ways to detoxify them after you put them in your mouth, like eating the clay along with the toxic potatoes. So I hope this helps, and I'll stop for now because I can tell I'm rambling. And again, as always, please have a fantastic week, and thank you so much, and continue to make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.